Stadium cards are some of the most important pieces when building a deck. There's a lot of stadium cards that really can synergize nicely with the strategy of your deck and how you want to build it. There's a lot of really cool stadiums that have existed that have always been good for the game, but there have been a fair amount of stadiums that you could make the argument are not as good for the game. In today's video, we're going to be ranking the best stadium cards of all time based on how good they were for the game. I've already done this video series on both Pokemon and supporters, and I guess items got to be next, so stay tuned for that. And if you're going to go on to enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like on the video, as always, and let me know what you think of the tier list down below, and I'll leave a link to this tier list down below if you want to go try it for yourself. And yeah, let's get into it, and let's rank all these stadiums now. All right, here we go. We got the stadium tier list here. Much like the original videos I've done on the Pokemon supporters, we got the same categories. Game ruining, these cards definitely made the game worse by existing. There's toxic, but not too game ruining, where they were pretty toxic, but they didn't like flat out ruin the game or anything. There's gatekeeper, but not too toxic. Cool and good for the game. These are the categories we're going to be discussing within today's video. And much like the other videos, I hope you all go on to enjoy this one. I don't have all the old stadiums in this video because I didn't play long enough to know all of that. I do have a few older stadium cards, mainly during the older days of the early Diamond and Pearl era. But I think this is a good tier list of all the best stadiums that ever existed. The stadiums just had to be relevant enough to make an impact on the format, and they had to see a lot of play within the format that they existed in. And I think this is going to be an interesting one to talk about. I do have Pokemon cards pulled up here so we can look up each stadium card so you all know what they do for some context. And let's start things off here with Broken Time Space, the first stadium to talk about. Now, you definitely can make the case that this is the best stadium card of all time. It's literally got broken in the name. What do you want me to tell you? Yeah, each player may evolve a Pokemon he or she played down during that turn. So basically what you can do is, back in the day when this card existed, you had the stadium in play. You could bench a Machop, and then evolve it straight to Machoke from your hand, and then Machamp from your hand, immediately putting a Stage 2 into play in a single turn. Rare Candy also did something similar, where you could use Candy on the turn you benched a Pokemon. You can't do that anymore, but back then you could. Broken Time Space was a very strong card. Now, back in the Diamond and Pearl era, when this card was a big thing, it saw a lot of play, but it didn't really, for the powerful effect it had, it didn't really actively make the game worse. I think maybe in hindsight, retroactively, you talk to a lot of the OGs, they may say that this card is bad for the game, but back then, I feel like it wasn't as overpowered as it could have been. It was definitely really strong. It allowed for some insanely powerful donk decks to exist, and it allowed for these big evolutions like Machamp, Kingdra, and Gyarados, to name a few, to be super successful. This card definitely was very powerful, but with how slow the game was back then, and with the different archetypes, with the SP engine and stuff, this card wasn't as over the top as it probably could have been. If this card released nowadays, this card would make the game insanely just nuts. I mean, imagine being able to put a Charizard and Pidgeot to play on your first turn. It would be a little absurd. So, definitely a really strong card. You could debate that it goes in Toxic just for how strong it actually is. It didn't really gatekeep anything by existing, because it's a card anyone can play. If you're also playing Evolutions, your opponent just gave you a free Broken Time Space to work with. It just kind of made for some toxic stuff. Being donked because of Broken Time Spaces in play is a little silly. It was very possible to get donked by Machamp or Gyarados or Kingdra, with this card in play. It was a very strong card. Cards like Jumpluff was another big one. Jumpluff was a very good deck back in the day, and Jumpluff really enjoyed Broken Time Space. A very powerful card. I don't think it was game ruining, because honestly, back then you'd be surprised how good this effect was, and you'd be surprised how non-broken it actually was, even though it was extremely broken. Just looking back, it didn't ruin the format as it maybe could have, which is interesting. I don't know, maybe if 2010 existed today or something, maybe this card would ruin the game, but back then you'd be surprised. Definitely a very powerful card. It definitely was toxic. Next up is Virbank City Gym. A very interesting stadium here. We can look up. We got Virbank City Gym. Now, this card only saw play because of an item card, Hypnotoxic Laser. Now, I'm sure the next video in this series will be talking about powerful item cards. There are so many to name off. That video is going to be a long one in the process. But Virbank saw play because of Hypnotoxic Laser, which basically was a free way to poison your opponent. You play the laser, you poison your opponent's active Pokemon, but you also flip a coin, and if heads, they go to sleep. The benefit of Virbank is it allowed Hypnotoxic Laser to effectively be plus 30 damage because of the extra 20 damage Virbank City Gym provided. So it immediately turned one of the strongest items already in the game into even and stronger item with Virbank. This card saw a lot of play. Mainly the deck that used Virbank the most was Seismitoad. Seismitoad EX was the best deck to play Virbank Laser. Honestly, you could make the case this was kind of a gatekeeper. I don't think it was toxic. Ironically enough, Hypnotoxic Laser, Verbank's, toxic. It's in the name. But I don't know, Verbank was definitely a strong card. Not every deck, thankfully, played it. Not every deck used Hypnotoxic Laser. There were decks that used it, and the decks that did use it were very, very good. Like, Seismitoad, one of the best decks of all time, did play this combo, and was one of the combos that card really enjoyed having, was that extra bit of poison damage. But I don't think Verbank was, over the top toxic. I don't know. I'm honestly leaning towards toxic but not game ruining, but I'm going to keep it in the gatekeeper category for now. Yeah, it just made Hypnotoxic Laser a ridiculously strong card. Next up is Lost World. Now, this is a funny one. There's two different Lost Zone stadiums here in this video, which is going to be interesting. So we got Lost World here. Now, when this card first got revealed alongside Gengar Prime, everybody hyped it up. Everyone's like, oh my god, this Gengar Prime is about to become S tier because of Lost World. So the effect is, it gave you an alternate win condition. Basically, once during each player's turn, if that player's opponent has 6 or more cards in or 6 or more Pokemon, in the Lost Zone, that player may choose to win the game. So all you had to do was put 6 of your opponent's Pokemon in the Lost Zone, play the Lost World, you win the game. Now, back then, Gengar Prime was the best way to do that, and Gengar Prime was a very hyped-up card, and this archetype didn't really go anywhere. It never took off. It got a lot of attention and hype leading up to the release of Lost World and Call of Legends, but that archetype just fell flat in its face, and it didn't really make an impact. It saw minor success, but it didn't really make any bit of an impact like everyone expected. It's one of the most overhyped things of all time. Probably cool. It's a cool card. It's literally an alternate win condition, and there's not that many alternate win conditions like this card anymore. There's Deck Out, there's the Unknown cards, but there's no, alternate win condition like Lost World anymore. I don't think we'll ever see a card like this ever come back, especially because Pokemon already did, a lot of Lost Zone shenanigans already. This card in Unlimited might be good if Lost Box is an S-tier deck. I don't know. Next up is Pokestop. Now, this is a card that's already in our format, and I'm going to be quite honest with you, I am a big fan of Pokestop. I think this is actually one of the most well-designed stadiums of all time. Now, hear me out. I know there may be a bit of an argument to be made that this card makes turbo decks a little too good, Moon, stuff like that. They are a little too good, Lost Zone Box. All these decks that play a million important item cards to function get even better when a card like Pokestop exists. Of course, once during each player's turn, that player discards the top 3 cards of their deck, and then any items they discard there, they go into their hand instead. This card is very fun to play, but it's also very punishing to actually play. Sometimes you roll the Pokestop, and you get completely just farmed because you discard too many good cards. You lose Pokemon. Most of the time, you lose supporter cards like Colress or Irida. Something like that, or Sada. But when this card hits, it hits. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. The reason I like this card, every single day 2 I've had this year have because of Pokestop being in my deck. All the decks I made day 2 of this year in the season, the main stadium I played was Pokestop. This card did carry my career, not going to lie. Gholdengo, Ancient Box, Lost Box. But no, this card I really like. I can see why some people might make the argument that this card is, bad for the game to a degree. I'm going to put it in cool. The only thing keeping it out of good for the game is that you can definitely make the argument that it does make these turbo combo decks a little too good, but I don't think that's really a good argument to be made about this card, in my opinion. I think it's just a really fun card. I'm going to miss it when it goes. I don't know, it's just an interesting card for, I don't know, I just like it. Next up, we got a big one here, folks. We got Tropical Beach. Now, this is a doozy. So Tropical Beach is arguably one of the most infamous cards in the TCG. Not because it's the best card ever. You honestly could make the statement, though, this card actually could be one of the best stadiums of all time with Broken Time Space. The thing that makes this card infamous is how rare it is. Now, it is a very strong card. Once during each player's turn, that player may draw cards until he or she has 7 cards in their hand, and then that player's turn ends. So essentially what happens is, it's like playing Cleffa or Gormandai Snorlax. You end your turn, but you get to build up a big hand. Beach was very, very crucial because it's a very relevant card to have, because when this card existed, a lot of the slower setup stage 2 decks were a lot better when Beach existed, like Keldeo Blastoise, Vileplume decks, stuff like that. They all flourished because of Tropical Beach being such an important resource in them setting up their combos really quickly, especially when all these big basics like Mewtwo and Darkrai existed. Now, the thing with Beach, this card could only be attained if you made it to the World Championships in 2011 and 2012, making this card very limited, a very limited card. Keep in mind, back then, the tournaments, had less players playing in them. So the tournaments were a lot smaller, making this card even harder to obtain, even back then, because there wasn't that many people going to these world championships and competing because, you know, it was hard to get your invite back then. There was less players, yada, yada, yada. There's less of these tropical beaches in the world right now. And that's the thing that maybe makes this card bad for the game, is because there's not enough going around. Like, if Beach ever came back as, like, in a format, so let's say Expanded came back at official Pokemon tournaments, right? Let's say the next regional is going to be Expanded format. Well, all of a sudden, Tropical Beach becomes a must-have because you need it in your deck if your deck utilizes it. A lot of decks could use Tropical Beach. A lot of decks can play it. The fact that a stadium has the effect of Cleffa is really, really good. Like, that's insanely good. That's a lot of value you get out of this card. Now, yes, your opponent can play it, so you're probably like, well, what's the argument you made? If it's so bad for the game and it's expensive, well, okay, well, what if you put into play, well, your opponent can play it too, right? Well, keep in mind, one, not everyone can own these. These are expensive cards, like $500 a card. Ain't nobody spending $1,000 for 2 stadiums in their deck. You know what I mean? Like, it's expensive, it's rare, hard to get, and it's also extremely good, and it is a crutch card for a lot of decks. I think it, like, okay, technically it's a gatekeeper in that regards, but I do think that it is toxic due to the nature of how hard it is to get. That alone makes it toxic. It's just a card that it's just hard to get, and it's toxic. I think that's honestly the best way to define Tropical Beach. It's a very strong card, but it honestly, it should get banned. Not because it's, like, bad for the game. It doesn't ruin the game or anything. It's just the nature of how good it is and how hard and rare it is and expensive. That's what makes it toxic. So, like, if there's ever an expanded event that comes back, Beach should just immediately be banned because these cards are hard to get. And keep in mind, people might own these cards who don't play the game anymore, who don't realize they're sitting on, like, $1,000 card. You know what I mean? Like, it's just insane. All right, next up is Power Plant. All right, Power Plant's interesting. So this was like the prototype for Path to Peak. Pokemon GX and EX is in play. Both yours and your opponents have no abilities. So, yeah, shut off a lot of valuable cards. Dedenne GX, Tapu Lele GX, all got shut off of this card, to name a few. Zoroark GX being another big one. Yeah, it's basically the prototype for Path to Peak. Cool card. I mean, it was nice to have ability lock in the format back then because, yeah, I mean, even back then, powerful GX and EX abilities did exist, and they did make a lot of decks strong. Like, even stuff like Mewtwo and Mew Tag Team GX did not like this card. And this card did have counters. There was a Marshadow in the format that was really good against it. Field Blower existed. It wasn't like a perfect counter like Path was. Even then, it was kind of like Path. You put it down, and it sticks, it sticks. It doesn't, it doesn't. It is what it is. That's basically what Power Plant was. But, you know, it's cool. It's the first prototype for Path. Back then, the rule box mechanic technically didn't exist, so it only shut off specifically EXs and GXs. But, you know, when Path came out, everything was different. It was the first prototype of Path to Peak, and I thought it was cool. I'm a big fan of these ability locking stadium cards. I think they're healthy for the game because there's a decent amount of counterplay against them. Because if you know that your deck is weak to these type of popular cards, you can just put cards in your deck to play around it, like Marshadow, or just play more Field Blowers or more natural stadiums, and bing, bang, boom. It's not that big of a deal. All right, next up is Giant Hearth. And this was one of the best cards for Fire decks. Kind of an insane card looking back at it. Basically what it does, once during each player's turn, that player may discard a card from their hand, and if they do, they can search the deck for 2 fires and put them in their hand. Kind of broken. It's literally Earthen Vessel, but for fire energies on a stadium? Holy smokes. This card was ridiculous because it also existed in the same format as the supporter card, Welder. We talked about Welder in the supporter ranking video, yada, yada, yada. Very good card with Mewtwo, Mew Tag Team, and Reshizard and Blacephalon. Very good card. I mean, probably just cool, I guess. It enabled a lot of the Fire decks to be really good, but Fire also had other strong cards in the format, not just like Power or Giant Hearth. I don't want to say Giant Hearth like ruined the game or anything. Even though the Fire decks were very strong because Welder was an insanely broken card, you know, Giant Hearth was only a piece of the puzzle. Now, here's a card that I really despise. Chaotic Swell. In my opinion, one of the worst design cards in the history of the game. Actually, funny enough, this came out alongside ADP. That's how you know this card was bad. Pokemon were already making bad decisions with ADP, and they made another bad decision with Chaotic Swell. Now, in theory, this card is cool. Whenever either player plays a stadium card from their hand, discard that stadium after discarding this one. So basically what it did is it nullified your opponent from being able to use a stadium. Unless they removed Chaotic Swell via Marshadow or Field Blower, there was no way they could play a stadium down from their hand. So let's say you're playing a deck that relies on these Giant Hearth or Power Plants to play the game. You just slam a Chaotic Swell down, and like, if you don't remove this with Marshadow, you play down your stadium, too bad. There you go. You can't play another stadium down for your turn. No stadium in for you. Kind of a broken card. It gatekept a lot of stadiums because, like, any deck could just play 2 copies of this card, and, like, basically all the stadiums in the format became irrelevant or close to irrelevant because this card just completely gatekept them out of the format. And I hated this card. I think it was just bad card design. I mean, in theory, it is a cool idea, but I do think that it made the format worse by existing. Yes, there were ways you can get rid of this card via Marshadow, but not every deck had the luxury to play a Marshadow just to remove Chaotic Swell. So, a crutch card, very poorly designed card. Yeah, I don't like this card. I think Chaotic Swell is bad for the game. It just, like, gate kept so many stadiums out of the format. It just made the game worse all around. Like, ADP had the ability to play this card, and, like, you couldn't play Power Play or anything to slow them down. It's just a silly, very bad card. I was very happy to see this card get rotated when it did. Yeah, I didn't like this card at all. Next up, we got Brooklet Hill. So basically just your usual setup stadium card for a specific type. It allows you to either get a water or a basic fighting Pokemon from their deck and put it onto their bench. It's a great card. A lot of decks utilized it. Buzzrock, Greninja played it. Those are like the main archetypes. Just a good setup card. Yeah, cool. Yeah, good for the game, I guess. I mean, it's a good setup stadium card. I mean, back then, there was no Buddy Poffin or Battle VIP. So getting multiple basics out that easily relied a little bit more heavily on cards like Bridget or Nest Ball or Ultra Ball. But when you had Brooklet Hill, it was a very good card. Also synergized nicely with those Pokemon recovery cards, right? You can put them back in your deck and then research them back out with Brooklet Hill, which stuck in play forever. And Water and Fighting were very good types during the era this card existed. So yeah, I think it was good for the game. Next up, it looks like we have Lysander's Labs, I think that is. Yeah, Lysander's Labs. Let's peep what this does. If you don't know what it does, it's essentially Jamming Tower. Pokemon tools in play, both your opponents have no effect. It's just Jamming Tower. Now, Jamming Tower is a good stadium in the format right now. It's a little too early to really tell how impactful it's going to be. I'm sure if I did this video in like a year, Jamming Tower would be on here. But Lysander Labs was effectively the same thing as Jamming Tower. So it's kind of like cram those two together. But you got to keep in mind this card in the era that it existed in. Not just because it does the same thing. It's in that same era. So you got to look back at how impactful it was in that era and what cards were in that card pool back when this card was around. And Lysander Labs was like fine. Probably just cool. Not every deck played it. It was like a very niche card, but there were decks that did utilize Lysander Labs to counteract other decks, so I think Lysander Labs was cool. Next up is Ultra Space, a very good stadium card for any deck that played Ultra Beast Pokemon, which maybe one day we'll see return to the TCG, who knows. But anyways, Ultra Space. Once during each player's turn, that player may search a deck for an Ultra Beast, reveal it, and put it in their hand. Now, it was an Ultra Beast card, which was insane. You could also get items and stuff, I think, which was kind of nuts. Not just Pokemon. That was pretty good. Yeah, pretty strong card. Ultra Space was a very powerful card. And I think it was cool. I mean, it was a little too good because of what it could grab, but it was cool. Not every deck played Ultra Beast, and really it was only good in those Ultra Beast specific heavy decks like Blacephalon, Naganadel, but even a deck like that wanted to sometimes play cards like Giant Hearth, so it was like not always popular, but it was cool enough. It was also a very unique stadium for what it did because it was unique to a certain mechanic. All right, next up is one of my personal favorite stadiums that I would love to see come back. We kind of did see it come back in a way with Frostlass, but that is Shrine of Punishment. Between turns, put 1 damage counter on each Pokemon GX and EX in plays, both yours and your opponent's. So yeah, it's basically Frostlass put on a stadium, except it doesn't stack. This is a very well-designed card. I mean, it punished players who built their deck around heavy GXs and EXs. Like, a deck like Rayquaza GX really did not like this, or Zoroark GX did not like this. It also made single prizers a little bit better because it was constant damage that you're putting on the board. So it made all these, like, little single prize decks like Garbodor, Buzzwole, like, all these little single prizers became a lot better because of Shrine of Punishment, and it punished deck building, which was really nice. Very, very healthy card. I would love to see this come back, but for rule box Pokemon. So good for the game. I love this card. I would love a reprint one day. We got Heat Factory next. All right, we got the Prism Star stadium cards to look at here. We got Heat Factory, Prism Star. This card was very good for fire decks. Once during each player's turn, that player may discard a fire energy from their hand. If they do, draw 3 cards. And if this card gets removed from play, it goes into the lost zone instead of your discard pile. So you can only use it once. But discarded a fire, draw 3 cards. Pretty good draw support. Most fire decks did play it. Good for the game, I guess. It was a pretty good stadium for fire decks. Just it was good support. It was like not over the top or anything. It was fine. Being able to draw 3 cards is pretty good. Getting fire in the discard wasn't bad because there were a lot of cards that synergized with Heat Factory. Now is another very powerful stadium card here. We got Thunder Mountain. Oh, whoops. I looked up the entire set. All right, Thunder Mountain. This card was very good, especially with Pikachu and Zekrom Tag Team GX. So the attacks of lightning Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's, cost 1 lightning less. Now, this was very good with a card like Pikachu and Zekrom Tag Team GX because its main attack full blitz, and now only needed 2 lightning energy, which you could do by attaching and then using like a max elixir or by using Coco Prism Star. Very strong stadium card. Just, it was a crutch in lightning decks. Like, every lightning deck needs to play it. Even if you're building a lightning deck today and expanded, you gotta play it. I mean, probably cool. I don't know. Like, it's not really a gatekeeper, but it was a very insanely powerful stadium. Like, being able to attack super easy with Pikachu and Zekrom out of nowhere is an extremely powerful effect. The card was never, like, toxic, though, in my opinion. I don't think it made the game worse, but it was definitely just a really strong stadium for Lightning decks. Easily the strongest Prism Star stadium by far. I don't know. It never really, like, ruined the game, though, in my opinion. All right, next up, we got Viridian Forest. Another really well-designed stadium, in all honesty. Viridian Forest, basically, once during each player's turn, they may discard a card from their hand and then search their deck for basic energy and put it into their hand. Free way to find energy. It's like a weaker earthen vessel. I liked it a lot. I thought it was good for the game. It's just a very healthy stadium card. Any deck that needs energy in their hand really liked playing this. Very healthy stadium. Another stadium that, honestly, if Pokemon wanted to reprint any day now, would be fantastic. I love this stadium. I think it was good for the game. I don't think it was bad or anything like that. Actually, the more I think about it, I'm gonna bump up Heat Factory to cool. Sure. But yeah, I like Viridian Forest. It's just a healthy stadium that I was always down to see. All right, next up, we have Wondrous Labyrinth here. All right, next up, we have Wondrous Labyrinth. Now, this stadium did see some play within, like, stall and control decks and kind of in Gardevoir, Sylveon. Basically, the attacks of non-fairy Pokemon cost 1 colorless more. It was a pretty strong card. I mean, a lot of decks that relied on these 1-energy attackers to operate were shut off pretty hard, and also making it really difficult to attack sometimes, because that 1 extra energy can make all the difference. It was good in, like, stall and control decks, and was good with Gardevoir, Sylveon. It was kind of an annoying card to deal with. If you had no way to remove it from play, usually it ended up being really hard to deal with. Probably cool. Honestly, not every deck played it. Like, I think all the Prism Star stadiums were fine. Like, Thunder Mountain was definitely the strongest of them all, but none of them are, like, over-the-top, silly, broken cards. Like, they're all cool, in my opinion. Wondrous Labyrinth was fine. Not every deck played it. Like I said, just really, like, control and stall decks played it, and that's about it. All right, we got another recent stadium here. We got good old Temple of Sinnoh here. All special energy attached to Pokemon. Both yours and your opponent provide colorless energy and have no other effect. Very good card against Lugia. I think it's nice to have a card like this in the format because it's a good counter to Lugia and any other strong special energy. Good for the game. Just counters to Lugia are always good. This actually came out before Lugia, which is kind of funny. But yeah, pretty strong stadium. When it does rotate, it'll be interesting, though Lugia is also rotating. But, I mean, yeah, just it's a good counter to these special energy hungry decks. Yeah, good card. I don't have anything else to say. It's a good stadium. Next up, we got Lost City. So Lost City is interesting. A stadium card that kind of goes... I didn't even spell it right. A stadium card that kind of goes in and out of play, obviously. So, oh, crap. Alright. Yeah, Lost City. Stadium card that kind of goes in and out of play. Whenever a Pokemon is knocked out, put that Pokemon in the Lost Zone instead of the discard pile. Pretty good. I mean, this is very good against decks that rely heavily on one of attackers. Something like a Lost Zone deck, for example, does not appreciate this. Gardevoir does not appreciate this card. Those are decks that really do not like getting Lost City'd. And it's really hard to deal with. Sometimes Lost City wins you the game on the spot because you have no way to get those Pokemon back after they go into the Lost Zone. So it's a very strong stadium card. Kind of keeps these decks in check. I think it's cool. I don't think it's, like, good for the game exactly. There are some weird combos with, like, Dusclops and stuff you can do with Lost City. And it is kind of an annoying card, especially when Pokemon or decks played in, like, a high quantity. Just the fact you can't get that Pokemon back. Like, that card goes to the Lost Zone. You can never recover it is what makes this card so darn good. All right, next up, we got Galar Mine. Kind of a control, like, stadium card. Never, like, over-the-top saw play, but it saw a little bit of play within the format. The retreat cost of both active Pokemon is 2 colors more. It just was really good at slowing the opponent down. It was good to play in these, like, more control mill-type decks that existed. Honestly, this card was cool. Nothing too crazy. It was a cool card. Nothing too crazy there. Next up, we have Training Court here. Another personal favorite of mine. Another card I wouldn't mind seeing getting reprinted. But yeah, Training Court. Once during each player's turn, that player may put a basic energy from the discard pile back into their hand. Pretty well-designed card. Just a great way to get energy in play. Combined really nicely with cards like Radiant Charizard, Galarian Moltres. A lot of decks really liked having Training Court in the format. I think it was a good card for the game. I thought it was cool. It's kind of like Viridian Force in that way, where it's like that niche effect of getting energy back or getting energy out of the deck. It's just really helpful. It's not over the top, something like Giant Hearth is, but yeah, it's pretty well-designed, and it's nice to have in the format when it existed. Next up is Glimwood Tangle here. I included this one because of its unique effect. Once during each player's turn, after that player flips any coins for their attack, ignore all results of those flips, and then flip the coin again. So it basically allowed you to reflip for the attack. It was really nice with, like, reflip attackers like Wailord and stuff. I wanted to include it because it's a really cool card. We've had this effect actually on basic Pokemon with an ability. I'm going to say good for the game because I think it was good for the game. There's no like over-the-top coin flip card in the format that made this card like over-the-top broken or anything. And it was just a fun card to have in the format because there's a lot of fun coin flip cards in the format that do exist. All right, next up, we got Tower of Water here. Very interesting card. Now, I didn't really include Tower of Darkness because that card wasn't as popular. Tower of Water definitely saw the most amount of play. The retreat cost of each Rapid Strike Pokemon in play required 2 colors less. Basically just saw a ton of play with Inteleon and Urshifu decks. That's basically it. Especially Urshifu when it was in its prime in 2022. Very strong stadium. Cool. I mean, yeah, it was good with Rapid Strikes. It was also good with like the Inteleon engine to a degree with Sobble, especially in the Urshifu deck, right? So I think it was cool. It was fine. A lot of the Rapid Strike decks used it all the time, obviously. It was a very important card for those decks. All right, here's a big one, folks. Path to the Peak. Oh my god, everyone's favorite card to hate on for some reason. Path to the Peak is a very broken card. It's basically Power Plant, but even stronger. Pokemon with a rule box in play, both yours and your opponents, have no abilities. Obviously, one of the strongest stadiums we've ever seen because rule boxes were updated and there's a lot more rule boxes like Greninja and Charizard that you shut off. This card obviously is one of the strongest stadium cards in existence. Very good card. There's always that discourse behind this card. Actually, recently, a lot of people have been asking for this card to get reprinted. I honestly wouldn't hate that. I think this is a very well-designed card. I mean, there's just too many good abilities in the game with like Charizard and Pidgeot and Gardevoir and Greninja. There's just too many good abilities. It really would be nice to have some kind of check to those in the format. Path is good for the game. I'm going to die on this hill. I think Path is a good card for the game. I'm going to just always say that. I always think Path will be good for the game. All right, next up is Crystal Cave here. Pretty much just good with Dragon and Metal Pokemon. It was pretty strong with Lucario and Melmetal Tag Team GX, and also really good with Duraludon VMAX. Those were the 2 decks that I think really utilized this card. Actually, Luke Metal didn't exist that long. I take that back. Luke Metal didn't exist as long as it did. But this card was good with Duraludon VMAX. That was like the main one. I mean, not a bad card. Just kind of cool. Never really like broke the game or anything. It was like cool for the game, I guess. Next up is Collapsed Stadium here. A very interesting stadium that's seen a lot of play in decks that basically want to get rid of those 2 prize liabilities, especially as time has gone on. 2 prize liabilities like Lumineon V and Rodon V have become even more problematic to have in play near the end of the game. So being able to just play Collapsed Stadium means you can bench it and then get rid of it and then punish your opponent for maybe trying to go after it or something. That's basically the idea. Collapsed Stadium saw a lot of play in Lugia, basically a staple within Charizard. Even like other niche decks that used cards like Squawkabilly did also play this card. It's cool. It is kind of an annoying card, though, because sometimes you can play it down out of nowhere and just, like, punish and grief the opponent for no reason. Like, sometimes your deck literally can't function at 100% when there's a collapse randomly in play. Sometimes, you know, it is annoying, right? If your bench is very limited to what you can use, and if you need a full bench in order for your deck to function, sometimes it can just literally lose you the game or something. It's kind of an annoying card in that regard. So that's what keeps it out of good for the game. All right, next up is Magma Basin. Man, fire Pokemon keep getting these over-the-toply powerful stadium cards. Magma Basin is an energy acceleration card for fire Pokemon. Once during each player's turn, that player may attach a fire energy from the discard pile to one of their bench fire Pokemon, and then they put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. Obviously really strong in a fire deck. Saw it play with like Radiant Charizard and Inteleon. Sees play with an Armor Rouge decks. A lot of decks did play it that use fire decks or fire Pokemon to their advantage. It's cool. It's a pretty strong card. Fire Pokemon, once again, are loved by Pokemon for some reason. They keep getting really strong stadium cards. But overall, I think Magma Basin is, like, cool. It's, like, fine. Next up is another Magma card. We got Magma's Secret Base, baby. We got back-to-back Magma cards, even though that's not technically a Team Magma card. But, yeah, Magma's Secret Base. Whenever either player puts a base Pokemon, except for Team Magma Pokemon, on his or her bench, they put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. So, it's Scapejaw Bog, but you can bench Magma Pokemon under it and not take damage. But that didn't matter because Magma Pokemon sucked. The main reason you played this because it was really good with a deck like Gyarados, which wanted you to put Magikarps into play so they all take damage so that Gyarados can do a ton of damage. That was the essential logic behind playing this card. It was cool, I guess. I mean, nothing too over the top and crazy. It enabled one archetype to be really good, and it was a pretty solid single prize deck in the format when it exists. That's why I'm going to put it in cool. Next up is Fairy Garden. An interesting stadium that was kind of a staple within fairy decks, especially any deck that played Aromatisse. So yeah, each Pokemon with any fairy energy attached to them had no retreat. This card was really good with Rainbow Energy because Rainbow Energy counted as a fairy energy, which enabled them to have a free retreat. Aromatisse box decks played it. Those are like the main decks that utilized it. Mega Gardevoir played it. It's another cool stadium card. I mean, nothing too crazy to write home about. It didn't enable any over-the-top toxic combos. They made for a pretty cool deck, actually, with the Aromatisse deck. This is a fun deck. You can move the energy around. Rainbow Energy, you had a toolbox of attackers to choose from. Cool deck. I like it. Next up is Scorched Earth. Another... Look at that. Oh, my goodness. Another Strong Fire Stadium card. What the heck, man? Scorched Earth. Once during each player's turn, they may discard a fire or a fight energy from their hand and then draw 2 cards. Minor draw support for fire decks. Some decks that played fighting energy also played it. Guess where it's going? You'll never guess. Cool. Nothing too crazy to write home about. Just another strong Fire Stadium card, because Fire Pokemon just love getting strong stadiums, apparently. Next up is another really infamous stadium card, and that is Dimension Valley. Oh my goodness. One of the strongest stadiums of all time. Each Psychic Pokemon attacks cost 1 colorless more. Really strong effect. There's a lot of Psychic Pokemon. Psychic Pokemon is one of the most popular types of Pokemon that get printed, and also some of the most powerful Pokemon cards that get printed. This card saw a lot of play. Still a very good card in Expanded. Just a very nutty card. I mean, maybe Gatekeeper to a degree. Just because, like, it's just such a strong card, and it enables so many Psychic Pokemon to be good. To name off a few of them, there's Pumpkaboo. There's Mew. I don't know, man. There's, like, so many different Pokemon that just abuse this card. It is insane. This is just a very strong card. It kind of is, like, over-the-top good, but not, like, Broken Time Space over-the-top, if that makes any sense. It's just a very insanely strong stadium with so many uses. Kind of a Gatekeeper in a way. I don't think it's, like, toxic or anything. That's why I kind of put it with Verbank City Gym. Next up is Rough Seas here. A card that really just saw play within fire deck, or water decks, I should say. All right, let me search this up again. Yeah, this card saw a lot of play within water decks. Once during each player's turn, they may heal 30 damage from each of their water and lightning Pokemon. The 3 main decks that played it was Seismitoad Water Box, Lapras GX, I think played a bit of it. Lola Ninetales GX played it. Wailord played it. Wailord Stall played it. And Mega Manectric played this card. I actually kind of liked it. I'm going to put it in cool, though. I don't think it was good for the game because there were a lot of really good Pokemon that could abuse it. Like I said, the Wailord Stall deck had a free way to heal every turn, which was really good. It's a really good counter to Verbank City. That was one of the nice things about it. It was actually a decent counter to Verbank City Gym in a way because you take the poison damage, you just play a Rough Seas, reset all that damage they just did to you, and it's, like, pretty good. So, yeah, Rough Seas is cool. Cool stadium card. We may see something similar return. Obviously, it's basically just Crystal Cave, but for water and lightning Pokemon, right? That was kind of the caveat with it. Just basically like Crystal Cave. It was a cool card. Even back then when there was a lot of uses for this card, it never was over the top. It was fine to have in the format. All right, next up is Silent Lab. So, arguably, we say Power Plant is the prototype for Path. This might be the prototype for Power Plant. Each basic Pokemon in play in each player's hand and discard have no abilities. Now, this is probably just better to a degree because it's specifically basic Pokemon. So, you could still use evolution Pokemon with rule boxes, but basic Pokemon are shut off altogether. And there's a lot of basic Pokemon abilities that are absurdly broken. I mean, to name a few, Lele, Dedenne, Crobat, Execute, another big one, if I remember off the top of my head. Shaman, obviously, Shaman EX. Yeah, very strong stadium card. I don't recall this card ever being, like, over-the-top broken, because there are a lot of abilities in the format that rely on basics that aren't rule boxes, that can't get shut off by cards like Path, which kind of makes this card a little bit more unique in that regards. Honestly, I think it's bordering between cool and Gatekeeper, because it is kind of a Gatekeeper, right? It does gatekeep a lot of these basic Pokemon, but it also keeps these powerful basic Pokemon ability in check. There's a lot of basic Pokemon in the format in-game that just have really good abilities that when they're shut off, they're not as, like, unbalanced as they could be, which is why I think it's cool. All right, now we have another powerful stadium that is literally getting a pseudo-reprint in Stellar Crown, I should say. That is, of course, Sky Field. Another really powerful stadium card. Each player can bench up to 8 Pokemon. Pretty strong stuff. I mean, Mega Rayquaza abuses this, but a lot of decks in general who want to just draw through a ton of cards every turn also love playing Sky Field. That's what makes it so good. Now, yeah, both players can use it, and obviously the effect is if it gets removed from play, you got to discard Pokemon until they have 5 in play like normal, but still just a very strong stadium. Now, when this card did exist, it was broken with, like, Shaman EX and stuff, because you could just draw so many cards because you could just fill your bench up with Shamans and draw through, like, half your deck in a turn. Very broken card. It's getting mildly reprinted. Kind of a Gatekeeper, in my opinion. Maybe even toxic to a degree, because, like, again, it made Shaman, like, egregiously good, because you could fill your bench up with Shamans, but also have room for other Pokemon because of the extra bench space you have. So, low-key, kind of a toxic card, not gonna lie. Next up is Forest of Giant Plants. Pretty sure this is the only banned card in this video, but this card is banned for good reason. It's basically Broken Time Space, but for grass Pokemon. pretty good stuff. And there happen to be some pretty insane grass Pokemon you can combine this with. The main ones being the Decidueye GX and, of course, the item lock Vileplume. With this card, you could go from Oddish to Gloom to Vileplume in a single turn and item lock your opponent before they even get to have a turn, which is silly. It also let you put like Decidueye GX into play in one turn, which is also really broken. Just like an insanely broken card. Broken Time Space in the more modern era, especially with item lock existing, didn't really go too well with a lot of players. This was a pretty dumb card. So it did end up getting banned, obviously. I think it got banned because of like a broken Shiftry combo deck. Definitely toxic for sure. Maybe even game ruining. I don't think Decidueye completely ruined the game or anything though. Like, it was a very broken deck. And I'm sure a lot of people looking back do not want that deck to exist because it's kind of annoying. I mean, no one wants to get item lock before they even get a turn. That's just not fun. But I don't think this card ever ruined the format or anything. I can't recall that ever being a thing. It was definitely very powerful and without a doubt easily goes in the toxic category by far. Next up is Parallel City. Oh man. I despise this card. Now I gotta search it up. Yeah, I despise Parallel City. Let's see here. Parallel City. Yes, I hated this card. Now, basically, it was a double-sided stadium, which is pretty unique, but I was not a fan of it. So, the first effect here, choose which way this card faces before you play it. Any damage done to attacks from this player's Grass, Fire, Water Pokemon is reduced by 20. That was decent against those type of decks like Greninja. I think Seismitoad also didn't like this. Obviously, like Fire decks weren't a big fan of it. And then the other effect, which unfortunately it's upside down. You can't read it. I'm going to have to just go to the normal text here. The player, when you play it on one side, it's basically an even better Clap Stadium because you play it and then the player the stadium is facing can only bench up to 3 Pokemon. Pretty broken card. Limiting the opponent's bench like that was disgusting. It's literally stronger than Clap Stadium. Very strong card. You could just play it down, point it at your opponent, and then your opponent has to only play up to 3 bench Pokemon. It limits what they can do. I did not like this card because like decks that relied on like setups to play the game really sucked. I was not a fan of it. Low-key, I think this card was toxic. I don't think it was game ruining. Not every deck played it. There were a decent amount of decks that did use it, but not every deck played Parallel City. But I'm going to say this card was toxic. I was not a fan of it at all. I did not like this card one bit. I did think it was bad for the game. All right, next up, we have Reverse Valley, the other stadium on this list that does the same thing where it's like you can choose 2 different sides to face it. So the one side is you can choose the way this card faces. Any damage on this player's metal Pokemon is reduced by 10. And then the other way, it makes dark Pokemon do 10 more damage. Turbo Dark decks did play this as a 1-of because it was just a free way to do more damage. Nothing too crazy. It was obviously not broken like Parallel City was. It wasn't annoying like Parallel City was. This card is cool, in my opinion. Now, here's an interesting one. We have Stump. So this is the oldest card on this list, Giant Stump. But guess what? This card was Parallel City, but it basically made it so that both players can't bench 3 or more Pokemon. And this card was really good back in the day. I don't recall people complaining about it. Gatekeeper, maybe? Because, like, I mean, back then in the older formats, like, benching multiple Pokemon, setting up your deck, playing a bit slower was a little bit more common. So maybe this card was a Gatekeeper. I mean, just, I see the effect of Parallel City, and it's like, okay, there's no way that wasn't, like, toxic, even back then in the format when it was a bit slower. All right, we got another one here. Lake Boundary, I think it is. Yeah, we got another one here we can look at. Yeah, we got Lake Boundary. Now, this card did see play because apply weakness for each Pokemon is ×2 instead. And back then, weakness was +30. So making it ×2 is insane. A lot of decks really did not like that. So some decks did play it. I guess it was cool just because the effect was so strong. All right, we got another one. I low-key forget what this is called. All right, yeah, we got Moonlight Stadium. That's what the stadium's called. The retreat cost of each Psychic Pokemon and Dark Pokemon is 0. Now, this card did see quite a bit of play because there was a lot of good Psychic decks back in the day. The main deck that loved this card was Gardevoir Gallade, one of the most infamously strong decks ever printed. Moonlight Stadium was a very good stadium for Gardevoir Gallade, and saw a lot of play in it. I guess it was cool. I don't remember playing against much Gardevoir Gallade back in the day. I mean, I know it was really popular, but, so long ago for me. But I don't think this card was broken. I think, you talk to most players played back in the Diamond and Pearl era, they didn't think Moonlight was broken, though it was very, very good within those Psychic decks, specifically the Gardevoir Gallade deck. All right, next up, we got another card with Beach in its name. Not Tropical Beach, though. A bit more well-designed beach card. Beach Court. The retreat cost of each base Pokemon in play is 1 colorless less. Very similar to a Sky Arrow Bridge. Same thing, basically, actually. I like it. I think it's cool. It's very good within decks that use a pivot Pokemon like Comfey. Even something like Tassagiri could play this card. So I wanted to include it because it saw a bit of play within Lost Box for a while before like Rescue Board came out. All right, we got Town Store next. a very unique stadium in a way where it's like, yeah, just search deck for a tool card. It helps your opponent, but it also gives you a tool card too. Low-key, I think it's good for the game. Just there's a lot of really good tools in the format. Now, this card has technically gone a little bit weaker over time with cards like Arven being in the format. But overall, I think it's a fine enough card to have in the format. I do like it. So I'm going to say that it was indeed good for the game. And the final stadium that we have to talk about today is Artazon. Pretty good stadium, pretty good staple. Just search deck for basic Pokemon that are rule box, put on your bench. It's a good way to set up. We're in a format where like fast decks do exist, so being able to set up pretty easily with this card is nice to have in the format. So I'm going to say that Artazon honestly is good for the game. I'm a big fan of this. Just it's a setup stadium. It gets any Pokemon. It's not like limited to like what Brooklet Hill did, but I do like it. I just like how you can get a Pokemon with it. I think that's pretty healthy, and I think it's good card design. And you know, it's always nice to have Artazon in the format. Sometimes it can save you. Sometimes you don't have a Pokemon that you need on your bench, and you can just get it for free, and it can help you out in a pinch. But yeah, there you go. There is my stadium tier list. It's a bit different than the supporter and Pokemon tier list because there's honestly not as many stadiums that made the game worse by existing. The only one I can literally think of was just Chaotic Swell. Now, you could make the argument for any of the stadiums in Toxic to be in that game-ruining category. Like, maybe Force of Giant Plants, maybe Tropical Beach, maybe Broken Time Space deserve to be in the game-ruining category. The only one that I truly know actively made the game worse by existing was easily Chaotic Swell. But that's a pretty decent stadium tier list for all the best stadiums of all time. Let me know what you think of the tier list down below. I'll leave a link to it down below if you want to go try it for yourself and all that good stuff. Let me know what you think of this down below. Did I miss out any stadium cards? I don't know. Maybe I did. Were there any like older stadiums and like older than the giant stump that were like bad for the game that I should know about? Anyone that would be above the gatekeeper category? Let me know down below. Because if we want to include more of them, but they're just going in cool, it's like, well, then what's the point? You know what I mean? There's too many in cool. But honestly, like stadiums are pretty well designed. I don't think Pokemon overcooks too much with the stadium cards. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. Recently though, they've printed pretty good stadium cards. Like literally all the stadiums above cool are like basically older, right? So Pokemon have gone away with better stadiums nowadays. But hope you all enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new already. Of course, we're on the road to 17K subs, and I'll catch you on another video very soon. Bye-bye.